Hello and welcome to the TT Podcast, the podcast where we talk to one person from the world of the TT to discuss their lives, their journeys and their ambitions with the greatest motorsporting event in the world. Would you concur with that statement, Lee, that it is the greatest motorsporting event in the world?
Concur.
Why do we think it's the greatest motorsporting event in the world?
Because it's my favourite one.
Well, I was hoping you were going to segue into the fact that
I don't care about anyone else's opinion.
we have got coming up next. Slightly nervous about this one.
I would be, because this is your job. Your job is like...
At what point do you ever have to...
I might throw you under the bus.
At what point do you ever have to technically interview your own boss for entertainment purposes? You don't, do you?
I just choose your words.
Like, imagine if Neil came to you and had to interview you.
Oh, the pressure he'd be under.
I know.
But I'm quite an intimidating...
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You know, when people talk about walking into the room with, like, Mike Tyson and them, so, you know, it's
the personality walks in the room before the person.
2 days before.
Yeah. Your reputation precedes itself. Is that what they say?
Why are we talking about this?
I don't know, because you're self-indulgent.
You're nervous.
I'm not nervous.
You are. You're sweating.
Technically, we've already pre-recorded this, so I know exactly what happens.
So you know you've already lost your job.
Right. Do you know what? This is the one podcast I've been nervous about, more so than Michael Dunlop. Paul Phillips, welcome to the TT Podcast.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm really good.
I was thinking how best to intro you. Head of Motorsport on the Isle of Man. Is that essentially the Bernie Eccleston of the TT, right?
Not really.
No?
He owned it. I don't.
Oh, right, okay.
I work on it.
But essentially it's yours. You are the top dog. You're as high as it gets.
Well, in terms of the TT, I'm responsible for the current strategy for creating it and implementing it. But we're different. We're unique in terms of sport and motorsport, but sport generally, that we're a government doing this.
Yeah.
We're answerable to it, both in terms of executive, but politically as well. And it's really unique. There is nothing. I don't know of any other government in the world that delivers sport. Lots of governments support sport and pay for sport to happen and create companies to deliver sport. It's like the London Olympics. Government did that, but they created something to do it. Mm-hmm. But in the Isle of Man, we actually, as government, do it.
Yeah. You're a big, massive fan of the TT podcast, aren't you?
Well,
number one fan.
Huge fan of it, Chris, yeah.
Yeah.
To be fair, I think I've listened to every episode, so, yeah. More like quality control, probably.
That's a low blow straight away.
Well, the fact that we're still here, or at least I'm still here,
yeah,
that speaks volumes for me. That'll do for me. What's your favourite episode?
You put me on the spot.
Yep.
Possibly Dr. Gareth Davies, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And it was largely nothing to do with the TT, but he's a fascinating guy and I thought I listened to that on a plane, and I expected it to be fascinating, and it was.
Yeah, and I don't. Do you know what? I don't even think we really dug into. I think there was more in there.
Yeah, I mean, he's remarkable.
Yeah, but as you know, we always start the podcast with the same question. The tap on the shoulder. Obviously, you've never received the tap on the shoulder. So what is your tap on the shoulder moment during a TT? Is it the first time a rider goes off?
The thing with my position in TT is that, like, sometimes, when the events are on and stuff, and my wife will say, "What did you do today?" And I say, "I don't know. I don't know, actually." It's like a firefighting thing. And many of the time, I might be on the grid when those taps on the shoulder happens, and many of the time I might not be, but it's something that always gives me a huge amount of apprehension and nerves, I have to say. There's for a whole range of reasons.
Yeah,
I can remember 2022. I missed the start of the first qualifying session because I was at green light watching live TV happen for the first time. But I think I was there at the second session. I just remember thinking, you do all this stuff. We've been working 3 years to get there, and you kind of control everything up to that point, and then everything's in the lap of the gods.
Yeah,
it's not a nice feeling that,
because I'm not saying you're a controlling person, but you're a very organized person, and that's all of a sudden that's taken out of your hands. You're gone from being like pretty much in control. Everyone comes to you for a decision, for all the answers are, well, not all the answers are there, but you're where the buck stops efficiently before the government. So and then that one day that sets off, your job turns on its head.
It's a weird, I don't know how to describe it, and I always say to my colleagues, my team, like, we've just got to do the best job of all the stuff that we're in control of, and deal with the uncontrollable stuff, and when the tap on the shoulder happens, it is, well, obviously that's not fair, is it? But there is a certain amount that is outside of anybody's control then. But I think as it's got bigger, particularly the last 2 years as well, there's like I get a bit of imposter syndrome. You're like, there's so many moving parts, like ridiculous amount of moving parts now. The scales change so much. And, I can remember driving to work this year on the Sunday morning before the first qualifying session, and it was early, but there was fans all up on the mountain. It was a nice day, and I could see all the engineers getting the data points ready for the camera points for the live broadcast, and there was marshals getting it, and you just think, blimey, the like, who thought this was a good idea, to let me be sort of in charge of some of it. And but it's just an amazing thing, isn't it? It is. I said to somebody this week that was here, and I said, whenever people talk about stuff being unbelievable, and you might see the TT on YouTube or something, that looks spectacular, it looks unbelievable, and lots of these sort of superlatives are overused. But when you stand at the side of the TT circuit anywhere, it is actually unbelievable is the only word, isn't it?
Yeah. I literally went out to watch the other 2 evenings ago at Hillbury. I stood there with quite a few German guys or whatever, and there was a few Irish guys there, and the first bike came through, and I was like, holy and like, I've been coming here for 10 years or whatever, rid loads of times, and these guys were just laughing at the fact that I was like, it was like I'd literally come off the boat, never seen nothing, but that's so I can't imagine what it must feel like for someone that, literally, I was joking yesterday, says if you didn't tell someone what was going to happen or what was going to come past, and you just set them at the start finish line, can you imagine, take the blindfold off, you stand there and just wait till you see this.
There's complete silence.
Your brain would explode. It's just like...
There's a thing with it, like, it's my ultimate memory, really, of TT growing up, and it was how that was then is exactly how it is now. Everything, so much has changed, but this one thing's not changed, and that's that visceral thing of this bike coming and howling and making more and more and more noise, and then it flashes past, and then a little gap, and then another, and it kind of keeps reinforcing that point, and it's just like, if you go to like the Northwest 100 Ulster Grand Prix, which are also really visceral and crazy, but the mass start thing's different. I don't know what it is. I think the scale of the TT circuit, and you can hear a bike, particularly the first bike.
From a mile.
So I grew up in Sulby, and we'd always watch in and around Sulby as kids, and you could probably hear from Balaf, and that build and build and build and build and build, and it's like, it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck now, really.
So when we normally chat, it's rare that we'll actually end up chatting about the TT.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, not that you don't love the TT, but your first love would be cycling, and I'm sure we'll start talking about cycling at some point. But what is I guess you've just answered it there, like, what's your first memory of the TT, and did you love it as a kid?
Yeah, I should say my first love absolutely is the TT. Cycling, but it's also my job, and you have to do things when it's your job that, differently. My first memory of the TT, so I grew up on the circuit. So my mum and dad's house is on Sulby Straight, or was on Sulby Straight, right at the fastest part of the circuit. So my bedroom overlooked, like, it was from here to the kitchen there of the TT circuit.
Which is about, what 7 foot, something like that? Yeah.
And, growing up, it was bigger than Christmas. I grew up in a house where my dad... Like Lee knows my dad. My dad is the biggest motorcycle racing fan in the world. If there was a scooter race in the car park now, he'd be there watching it with his family.
I seen him the other night. We were sitting talking, and he loves it. He goes everywhere to Southern London. He goes over to Ireland.
Just loves it. And our family holidays were to go to Ireland and watch motorbike racing. And so we grew up around it. I was very lucky as a young kid. My parents gave me a lot of freedom around the village and stuff on BMX, and we'd go out and just watch every bit of it and integrate into every single bit of it. But I suppose my earliest memory that I can always think back to would be about, I'm going to say like 1984, 1985. And I can remember being with my dad watching, and I could remember that Joey Dunlop was number 3, Mick Grant was number 10, and Roger Marshall was number 11. And they were like the guys that I was always looking out for. And then I can remember TT's back because, you know, it's going to make me sound ancient, but, you know, people were getting videos then. And the TT, I think the like TT reviews were like 85 onwards. And then, so like my dad would get that like 6 months after when it came out, you know. Yeah. And then I'd just watch that all winter, you know.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, mid-80s, I guess, yeah.
But no interest in like going racing then?
So probably got motorbikes quite early. You know, like motorbikes, everything in our house. My dad raced, always had bikes. I had a bike from, I don't know, 4 or 5 or whatnot. And loads of people in the village were into bikes, and people raced and whatnot. And, you know, Dave Molyneux was in our village, and there was loads of guys doing the Manx Grand Prix and stuff. And my dad always, I guess, because motorbikes were such a big part of our life, I think he just always said, and bear in mind, he had been racing, like, motorbike racing is for mugs. That was always what he said, motorbike racing is for mugs, you know, it's dangerous, you never have any money and stuff. And I guess when I look back now, that was kind of like a brainwash thing to say. And we went motocrossing, and we raced motocross for years and years and years, and that was like, you know, you fall off motocross, it's safe, and it's but I think, you know, I was always brainwashed away from it and stuff. And then when I got to my, you know, later teens and stuff, I was losing interest. Motocross was never my first love, really. And you know, you get to that age, I was playing football a lot, doing all the other things you start doing, and you get to the end of your teens and whatnot. And my mum and dad were spending, you know, my mum and dad didn't have loads of money, and they were spending a lot of money on us going motocross racing, and I just sort of, looking back, I did the good thing, and I sort of stopped doing it, and and I probably, that period is probably the least I was into my whole motorbike passion, you know, like drinking and all this other stuff and whatnot, but it was still always there. I mean, TT changed for me, so TT was like, growing up, it was like super exciting, and it'd be like up for morning practice because we lived on the circuit. You couldn't sleep in, you had to get up, you know.
Yeah, you had no choice. Yeah.
Someone passing your front window at like 5 in the morning.
That was your alarm.
Yeah, like
you can't even imagine that now. You know, like for not you're not normal, but like if you're living in your village in England and suddenly 5:30 on a Monday morning, some guy comes past your front door at 150 miles an hour. Like, if you were hungover or sleeping in or in the middle of a nightmare, can you imagine what that would be like? You'd be like, what is happening?
I loved all that. I loved all the morning practice stuff and whatnot. And then you know, you get a bit old, and then TT became parties, you know, so like, you know, it was
the island comes alive,
and it was going out drinking and all that kind of stuff. And then I just slowly got sort of more back re-engaged in the whole thing, and I was still going to see quite a lot of motorbike races. I'm going to Ireland a lot. Still going to Ireland a lot. I like Ireland. I like the country full stop. And I liked racing in Ireland, and I started going there. Same thing again, you know, I used to go with my dad all the time, then I started going with the lads, and, you know, having a great weekend and all the rest of it. So
then how does one get into this position where you become the head of motorsport?
I think
because again, you were in banking as a job, right?
So I was in banking. I worked in I got paid by a bank.
I was about to say work.
So bear in mind, I'd kind of grown up around motorbike racing, and I just got to know a lot of people, you know. And then I left school, and I got a job, and then I ended up getting another job in the bank, and it's like, it was the craziest. It was pre-banking crash, you know. There were different days in banking, you know, and it was just, I worked in IT, and it was like with a load of lads who I'm still best mates with now, but it was like going on a stag do 5 days a week. It was just mental, but it was no good, you know. I wasn't looking after myself. Like, I wasn't eating good. I wasn't working hard, you know.
Because it wasn't what you had. I
had no passion. It was a tiny little piece in this, you know. I worked for Barclays, which is this, you know, gigantic thing, and like it made no difference if I came in to work or not. It actually made no difference. You know what I mean? That's
motivation right there.
but you know, and anyway, I knew a lot of people, and I've always felt like I was pretty organised and whatnot. And I started helping some people who I knew to like maybe get sponsorship, you know, in racing. I started like, maybe if you did this, I didn't necessarily know, but I maybe thought I could see like how we could do it and do something. And then I started doing some writing and whatnot. And at the time, the TT that I was usually passionate about, so I was talking about sort of 2002, 3, 4, that period of time, was really at a low ebb. It was not what I felt it ought to be. It wasn't what it was like when I was growing up with it.
Barty spoke about this.
Yeah.
It was a poor representation of what I believe it ought to be, and because I was writing for magazines and stuff, I started to use that as something to write about. And I was quite critical and whatnot, and I guess that caught the attention of somebody. And I think Ian Locker, actually, who I'd become quite friendly with, had said, and Milky had just stopped racing, by the way. He'd had his crash, and I'd been helping Milky a lot before then, get rides and sponsorship and whatnot. And I think Ian Locker said to what was called the Department for Tourism and Leisure at the time, you've got a guy in the Isle of Man who could possibly help, and you've got Milky there, and still quite young. Then he retired quite young. Maybe you should talk to him. So I remember getting invited in by a lady who was chief executive at the time, and the minister of that department at the time, and they said, like, so what do you think about the TT? And I thought I didn't.
Were you
didn't sit on the fence?
Yeah,
but I wasn't really there they asked me the question. I wasn't there for any other reason, and I told them I think all these things were wrong with it. And
so you didn't appreciate that it was like going to be a job, so you just.
Well, I don't know if it was, but I think they were just sort of like reaching out to, like, it wasn't just me that was saying negative things. Like the world was saying negative things at the time, and then they asked if we would do a little bit of like a little bit of a project, me and Milky, which we did on the 2005 TT, and it was just mental. Like it was bad. It was bad.
In respect,
it was just like it was 2005.
Yeah.
But the race was promoted and organised like it was like 1970 probably.
Right.
Probably like, I wasn't around 1970, but I'm going to get, it was just, it had just stood still. And by now, MotoGP was a thing, sport was becoming ever more professionalised. We're just tiptoeing towards kind of the digital revolution, the start of it, we're all starting to get an email address and, but the world was changing a lot, and the TT was like cottage industry really was. And anyway, did a load of work and I was very passionate about it. And it was clear that, it couldn't be left to just being like a totally voluntary operated thing and whatnot. And some jobs got created and I ended up applying for it. I went from a really well-paid job where I had no pressure to a not as well-paid job where all of a sudden I inherited all this pressure and stress. But it was the best thing. I wouldn't always say it was the best thing I did, but for me, as a human being, like, Christ knows where I would have been if I'd have just been fat, lazy, sort of computer guy in a bank,
tapping numbers on a screen.
Yeah, but even for your mental well-being, you know what I mean? You'd no drive, or so you were clearly searching to help these guys in motorbike racing previously because you got nothing out of work. Do you know what I mean? You were doing all those things to get.
Yeah. I can't. It doesn't really matter. I've never been able to sit still. I don't rest very well. I don't.
I've seen that.
Yeah, I don't.
It's something you've got no worry about there, Chris.
Yeah, I love it.
People are different.
Yeah.
And do you know what? The point when you realise that's not a problem, just get on with it and it's fine.
Yeah.
But I like to do stuff and then so that's the long answer to your question. That's how I ended up there, really.
So prior to that, there was no such thing as a head of motorsport. So who was in the government? Who was kind of looking after it? And
it was really. So there was kind of like a bit of ACU. Yeah. There was a bit of civil service, and then there was a bit of Manx Motorcycle Club, as it was at the time. At that time, but there was no strategy or plan. There was no real income. There was no direction. There was no real ambition. It was a very different time.
Yeah.
Do you think that all dwindled from? I know it was quite a bit earlier, but when it was massive and they didn't need to do anything, like when it was still part of the World Championship calendar and all these things, and then nobody really thought to pick the slack up to move it forward, or it just got into that position because there was a lack of communication between three different.
Yeah, I think any kind of product, which TT ultimately is for some people, kind of goes through these dips and troughs and whatnot, don't you? And sometimes I think And you see this in all walks of life. Sometimes things have got to get really bad before they can get better. And I think the decline in TT was at least a 2-decade process.
Yeah.
And it was gradual.
Yeah.
And I think at the point when you got to 2002 and David Jeffries' accident happened was for sure the turning point. Although that turning point still took a few years, but it exposed a huge amount of kind of operational and cultural failings. And then there were other things that then would come later on where, you got, even then, pre-centenary of the TT, you had an event that had gone into a huge amount of decline, but it still had the history, it still had the kind of all of that prestige and whatnot. From the moment, or before I started working on it, up until this absolute day now, I've always felt it's a sleeping giant as a sports property. And only now do I think we are starting, even after I've worked on it for quite a long time, only now do I think we're starting to tiptoe towards its actual potential as in terms of like audience and awareness.
It might be a difficult question to answer this one, and I asked Barty on a previous podcast, where do you think the TT would be right now if it wasn't for you?
So I don't think it's about me. I think it's about lots of different people.
Yeah.
But I think if things hadn't changed, I think it would have been forced to stop. And the reason I say that is because the Motorcycle Industry Association in the UK had written to the Isle of Man government to say the TT is now bad for our industry. Yeah. And if you don't sort this out, we're going to go to Whitehall and get them to put pressure on your government to stop this.
That's exactly what Barty said.
It
was bad for press, it was bad for motorcycle, it was bad for everything.
That's almost like as big as an external threat could get to it.
Yeah.
It's feasible. And I think locally the view was that the TT would get to its centenary and stop. That was the view. I don't think anyone really locally thought it'd get to its centenary and then kick on.
So then now you're in charge of it. How do you go about starting to... It's like a what would the analogy be? Like trying to turn a cruiser, cruise liner around. So how do you start?
Yeah, I was 28 at the time. I had a huge amount of energy and not much experience. And I look back now and I regret a lot of things. I was like a bit of a bull in the china shop. Although I would change a lot of things, I think all of that kind of that approach probably helped because I didn't know what I didn't know, and we just got some stuff done. And there was a lot of low hanging fruit, really. Like it was kind of obvious that we needed to have an event there that was more professional, that was more engaged with the teams and the riders. It was obvious we needed to try somehow to get better teams to come, that we needed the manufacturers to come.
Because at that point, they were struggling to get proper, you know what I mean? Like 10 years or 20 years before that, there was like...
You wouldn't have come to the TT. It wouldn't have a viable thing for you to do.
I'm not saying I'm on the level
as
of
an
rider,
example.
but as an example, yeah. So 10 years previous to that, they would literally, the top riders were on a decent decrease, do you know what I mean? And that was, and if there's, like anything, if there's not top people, whether it be tennis, football or anything, well, why bother? Do you know what I mean? You're going to watch.
So it needed that sporting narrative. We need to be excited about it. We needed to look better, feel better. It'd gone 100 years without any ownership of any of its own IP. So it didn't. The government didn't own the TT. And that has been a process that I think has probably taken us up to this year to conclude. That's how.
Mm-hmm. That's a
challenging
crazy thought, isn't it? That something that old and no one thought to.
Yeah. So. And then of course it had a cost base at that time. It needed investment, but there was no income coming into it really. There was hardly any sponsorship. There was no licensing really. There was not really any ticket money. There was no broadcast money. And again, like I said before, it was like the start of this kind of digital revolution. So the period, sort of 5, 6, 7 to like the mid sort of 2000 teens, whatever you call that. TT went through enormous growth. Better riders, better teams, better TV, a lot more eyeballs, a lot more people started coming. It grew attendance by 15,000 people per event, and then millions of pounds worth of revenue was raised over that time to start coming back into the event for the first time to offset the cost. But it was all done fairly organically. There wasn't a plan or a strategy, and it grew really quickly, and it became a problem for government really because, as I said right at the start, this unique situation where public sector's trying to do this thing with commerciality and sport and all the rest of it, and the kind of political view was to try and outsource some of it and whatnot. So that kind of happened then. I can't remember. at what stage. That was the attempt to try and fix this problem that had been created by growth.
Mm-hmm.
Almost organic, unplanned.
Success was a problem.
But sorry, Paul, what was the catalyst for that regrowth? What had you done? Like you said, there was some low hanging fruit, but what were those things?
All those things together, really, you know. So it started.
But what made the riders come back then? What made the bigger teams start to come back? There must have been an incentive for them.
It was communication. You know, we used to like the TT didn't talk to riders and teams. You know,
they just waited for entries to come in.
Yeah,
you'd either go off your own back because you wanted to go, or you didn't go.
Right.
Well, I mean, a good example is your good friend Steve Plater, who was British Super Sport champion in like '98, I think, and he wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. So he's a pro rider. Early in his career, wanted to do it, and he entered. His name was in the program as a professional bike rider. He needed to earn some money, and I don't think. From what I gather, he didn't like ask for a load of money. He wanted to just cover some travel costs or whatever. And there was no conversation. It didn't happen, and he didn't ride. Of course, he did ride the TT, but right at the end of his career, and had some success straight away. But he probably should have had a 15-year TT career.
Yeah.
I never knew that actually.
Yeah. I'm sure 98. Yeah. Like he was a big thing in the UK. So, you know, I can remember going to Brands Hatch British Superbike in, like, I'm going to say the end of 2005 maybe, and, you know, just sort of like with Milky and just sort of wandering around, seeing people, and nobody wanted to talk to you. You know, you were bad news bears. You know, nobody wanted to.
Did those guys know who you were? And
well,
why
no.
If
we spoke to people,
right, okay.
I can remember a good example. Gary Pinchon. Right, Gary Pinchon was the sports editor of Motorcycle News and therefore quite an influential person. And Motorcycle News back at that point in time, pre-digital revolution, was the thing. You know, you had to be... And Motorcycle News' endorsement was important in the industry. And Motorcycle News were anti-TT. They weren't really doing much about it, and they'd done some exposés on it, and that was not a good marriage. And I remember we wrote to Michael Guy, said, "Can we meet you?" And we sat down. Not Michael Guy, sorry, he's current sports editor, Gary Pinchon. I said, "Can we?" Had a coffee with him and said, "Like, it's going to be this. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do the other." And he said, "I like your enthusiasm, boys, but it's just not going to happen." A lovely guy, but you know, fair play. And I can remember being at the same Brands Hatch last BSB end of the year, 12 months on, and I can remember seeing him across the paddock. It's like, boys, come, let's have a chat.
Just in 1 year.
In 1 year, yeah. And we just got some better riders. The fixed some of the easy stuff. The comms was better. The marketing and promotion started to get better. I mean, if you look at it all now, from where we are now, it was rubbish, but it was the trajectory was moving from that to just
absolutely nothing to.
And we arrived at a point on the Motorcycle News point of view quite quickly where the TT is by 1,000,000% their best-selling edition, you know, always on the front page and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. That's not a measure of success, but it's just like an indication of kind of
a tick of the box of
what happened. Direction. And it just sort of built from there. And then, you know, the riders that we started to encourage to come across and some of the teams became advocates of the event. Like I always said then, and I always say now, that our event is the hardest, the most dangerous, the longest. You know, it's got a lot stacked against it. So we've got to be the best in terms of experience, in terms of customer service, you know, all that kind of stuff, to make it attractive. Because if there's any barriers you put up at our event, people go away. We saw that. If you make the regs out of sync with everybody else, well, we're not going to build a bike for the Isle of Man. Yeah. If we don't look after you in the paddock, we're not going to go to the Isle of Man. You know,
because it's hard to be here.
It is
when everything's good. Like I say this to people all the time. Like you really have to look after your mechanics and everything because they're here for like 2.5 weeks. Do you know what I mean? Like silly little things, and that's not even on the scale of what, but as a team level, you know what I mean? It's a hard event. It's hard for the rider, hard for the staff, hard for your family, everything. But on his level is tenfold. You know what I mean? If you're, like say, changing regs and rules, and that's another incentive. Like that's maybe too much money for a team, or it makes another bike.
That's a really good example. So the TT had its own rules for all of the classes. So you had to build a bike to come and race in the Isle of Man.
For it,
like now that's even like what you have done for the Manx. There's no more 750s. No. That was literally the only place in the world that raced the 750 was the Manx for probably the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So like there was kids buying, like probably kids that didn't have enough money anyway, whereas they had maybe a 600 to ride in England or Derby or whatever. Then they had to buy, if you were genuinely wanted to win it, you had to buy a 750 Suzuki to...
That's the thing. It's hard enough in the first place. Why make it?
Why
add more barriers?
Yeah.
And I think, and then what really helped us was some riders came and rode in it, and I'm thinking back to like James Hillier, Connor Cummins, people like Gary Johnston, Cameron Donald, people who were racing in various classes in the British Superbike paddock, and they became advocates. They said, "We love it. It's great. You should go and do it." And for a period of time, there was a lot of new riders, and the TT needed a lot of new riders. Not so much now, but it needed an influx. And over the course of, 5 years or so, it had an influx, and many of them are now. Well, the top 20 is full of that influx, really.
Yeah, that will have been my memory, because I'm a little bit younger than all them guys. But like James, Gary, Guy Martin, and even Michael was very, very young to come.
Yeah,
but even all them. And that was the first sort of surge of now. It sounds stupid to say it was cool to go, but it was all of a sudden.
That was the thing.
Not this thing over there. It was like, why is everybody going there? And then
little things happened. Like this will sound silly to some people, but Valentino Rossi came to the TT because he wanted to, and he basically came and said, "This is cool." So at that point in time, if Valentino Rossi says it's cool, then it's cool.
Yeah.
And then sponsors were coming in and they were helping speed that up. A good sponsor is not about cash. A good sponsor is about adding value and using their audience and taking you forward. And we went from when I started working on the TT, the senior TT was sponsored by a shop in Douglas.
A shop,
yeah, a shopping centre thing. And all the sponsors were like local companies, which there's nothing wrong with, but if you want if you want to be. Yeah, and then all of a sudden it had major industry brands and blue chip companies that were sponsoring it, and it's a whole lot of things. You keep asking me what was it? It's a whole lot of things, and it sounds a bit sporadic, and it was sporadic. There was no plan. It was just like there's a lot of stuff here. Let's just attack it.
Yeah. Just throw as much shit at the wall as you can.
You said obviously you were like at 28, you were very enthusiastic but no knowledge. But if someone said to 28-year-old Paul what it is now, would you is this what you thought it was, or is it past that now?
No, it's not past it. Like I said, I always felt it's a sleeping giant, still do, and I think we're only just, and I'll explain why, only just on that trajectory to get there. But the problem when you're 28, which actually you think you've got some maturity by 28, but like, my daughter's 16 at the minute, you can't tell her anything. But you just like, But
you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. And it's only now, as I've got a bit older, I'm starting to appreciate like when people impart wisdom, like
we're trying to calm you down or trying to,
or anything in life,
But the thing is, sometimes when you do know it, it actually ends up restricting you and holding you back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you've got fear rather than.
I don't think I would change much. Yeah. I don't know whether it'd have been as successful without that. Naivety, but.
And at that point, it's just you and Milky still, as the team started to grow. At that
Started
point.
getting a few more staff, yeah. Milky was not working on it. I started working on it full time. Milky wasn't.
Right.
Milky's a mechanic. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Bus driver.
Yeah, you name it, he was doing it. But and started growing, and then like I say, it went through that attempt to take some of it externally, which failed, and it failed really looking back for good reason. Because it is so complex, it needs the roads, it needs the hospital, it needs the police, it needs government to coordinate all these things. And it went into this period then, in the last few years before the pandemic really, where that had failed, and it was kind of, there was some sort of flux. It was operating, again, still without any plan, hadn't really fixed any of the underlying problems, and a lot of the things that we would measure success by were plateauing. So attendance, income, media coverage.
And what year would this have been?
I'm talking 16, 17, 18, 19-ish, I suppose. And at this point, and the thing that's arguably the most important point is talking about where we started to that point, is that digital revolution had happened.
Yeah.
So 05, probably didn't have a Facebook account.
Yeah. No.
Might use YouTube now and again. Yeah. Twitter, Instagram hadn't been invented. All of a sudden we're in this really digital age, and the TT was still very linear in terms of like content and distribution and all this kind of stuff. And we were arriving at a point where, we're a bit asleep at the wheel probably, and you've got massive generational and territorial gaps in it. And I kept saying this around that time that, everybody's talking about the TT as this, world, international, global event, but it's not. It's got an audience in the northwest of England of middle-aged men.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately where it's at, and it ought not to. It said right at the start, it's unbelievable, and everybody should know that it's unbelievable.
Were you worried with the direction you wanted to take it and what you wanted to achieve with it? Were you worried that you were going to upset those middle-aged men in the north?
To be honest,
because the let's call it TT history is such a
and I've gone through a lot of that, obviously, and that will probably never change. But for me personally, at that time, I'd actually I thought we were never going to be able to achieve what personally and professionally I would like to achieve, and I was kind of done with it really, and I think I'd lost a lot of passion, and
because you got to a point of where it wasn't going to take the next step,
and I probably didn't also know what that was, because you're in this kind of like annual cycle of doing it and all the other stuff that sits around it, and you never really had that thing. So when it got cancelled in March, obviously everyone was going crackers, and I remember feeling relieved that it was being cancelled. I can remember thinking, I'm glad I don't have to go through another
cycle
one. And I remember, I said to my wife, I said, like, that is the opportunity now to get out of this, And
so the plan was to get out of it.
Yeah, and I had a couple of other opportunities as well at that time, and I was like, this is it's painful because I really, really, really love the TT. It's not like I've just got a job. I grew up with this thing, But I thought, this is the opportunity to because this is just not, it's not good. It wasn't good for, like, it was stressful, and it wasn't necessarily as rewarding as I didn't enjoy my work, basically.
Yeah.
Anyway, the pandemic came, and my boss now, who was fairly new in the job at the time, is the chief executive of our department with a very, very wide remit, of which we're only a tiny little bit. I had some pretty frank conversations with him, and he kind of persuaded me really, and persuaded me to stay on the basis that the ambition that I felt we should have for the event was realistic and we could do it. And he kind of motivated me, and we basically started on a big review. We kind of ripped everything up, and were really inward facing, quite self-critical of us, as an organisation and everything. And
that's impressive, isn't it? That someone, because like normally it would be the other way around. You would have had to motivate the council as such, your boss. You know what I mean? For someone in that department, that to me, that seems strange that he was willing to try
and being absolutely true to his word. And we got given the opportunity to do this work. We produced the TT's first strategy. So I said before, we'd gone through all this time without a plan.
The first strategy.
Yeah,
2020.
115 years. But Formula One didn't have a strategy for 60 odd years, and we delivered that in January 21, and we spent a lot of time, Zoom became our friend, and we spent a lot of time of selling that in to everybody, and got almost unanimous support from all of the kind of key groups across TT, whether that was the riders, the teams, the sponsors, the broadcasters, other parts of government, the voluntary side, the marshals, the medics, the race organisation, and that plan was basically a foundation for delivering success. We were able to raise some investment from Treasury over some plans, to pump prime plans that would deliver more income. That's obviously a big challenge, because you can see that the costs are going to always go up, and if you want to be sustainable, which is kind of the whole basis of our strategy, is like delivering a sustainable event, one that we can put on for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we've come back, and we're on this new trajectory. I said it in with my team the other day, talking about like we're in a 10-lap race and we've done 2 laps, so we can't make any mistakes, you know, right now. This is still quite a long race, you know. But I just feel like we've come back much more fit for purpose. We're growing audience like unbelievably quick. And there's a lot going on around the TT at the moment. And I think, you know, our ambitions, certainly if you look in like the kind of league table of motorsport, are not to be a bit better than some of the stuff closest to us. It's to be right up there in the kind of top 5 or 6 properties globally. And that's where the TT should be.
Okay, we're going to pause the conversation right there with Paul. Now, if you want to watch this episode, it's going to be out next week right here on TT Plus. And here is a little teaser for your faces.
There are far more sophisticated sports than ours with bigger budgets, but they might not get as much traction as us in this world because they're just not as cool or as exciting as ours. You know, look at like, I don't use TikTok, right?
Yeah, you do.
No, I don't. But I get it, and you know, we're flying there.
That episode is out right here on TT Plus next week. But until then, Lee, I'd love to say it was a pleasure.
It has been, mate. It has been.
It really hasn't. See you next time.